I'm delighted to be able to introduce Rich Brooks to you, someone that many of you do not need to have introduced to you because you've known him for a long time. But for those who didn't, I want to share a few words. Rich is someone who grew up in this church. His mother and dad were members of this church before Rich was born, and so he was brought here and was part of the children's choir and the youth group. And after he went away to college and he and Kathy moved back to the area, resumed their activity and membership. And I've got to know Rich and his many capacities that he served in this church, particularly in positions like on the board of trustees. But I probably got to know Rich best through our running. There's a running group that we are a part of and have run together for many years, although the pace has slowed down quite a bit. Running is something that is at the heart of much of the story of Rich's life, as he was a runner for Oak Park River Forest High School and then at the University of Illinois, and has continued running, although I guess in the last few years the running has been kind of more occasional, but he's now serving as the coach of the cross-country team at Grace Lutheran. Cross-country running is a sport that takes you through all kinds of territory. Sometimes you'll be on a smooth, grassy surface of a golf course, but sometimes a cross-country course will take you through some muddy, hilly, difficult terrain. And cross-country is maybe a bit of a metaphor for the journey that Rich has been on. For much of his life, the running was easy, and the pace was swift and fast. But there was also a season that he spent in some pretty dark places, and he's going to share that with you. But one of the things that's redeeming about those dark places is that there's some things that can only be discovered in the dark places, and those are the most important discoveries. And sometimes the things that we need the most to experience in life are the things that we would never pray for. And Rich is going to share something of his story. And Rich, it's a delight to welcome you to the pulpit as you share your story. Rich, welcome.
Thank you, Pastor Parker. It is an honor for me to speak this morning. I'm going to take you on a journey that begins with the worst day of my life. It's a day that's tough for me to talk about and think about. Conjures up all sorts of emotions for me and my family. Sadness, anger, despair, loneliness. But I am encouraged and strengthened by the words of Christian author Henry Nouwen, who writes, "Tell your story in freedom. The years that lie behind you, with all their struggles and pains, will in time be remembered only as the way that led you to your new life." The worst day of my life and my family's life is June 27th, 2005. A hot, humid summer day like any other, but that is the day that I had a full-blown, complete, and total nervous breakdown. I spent 5 weeks in the hospital, during which time our home and my business were raided by 22 state and federal agents. This was followed by a year-long grand jury investigation, resulting in convictions. I went to prison for 2.5 years. I did time in some of the highest security, most dangerous prisons in the state, from Cook County Jail to Stateville and Joliet. I was transferred to Hill Correctional Center in Galesburg, Illinois, where I spent 22 hours a day confined in a 6-foot by 9-foot cell for almost a year. Then I went to Vandalia Prison in downstate Illinois, where I experienced the hell of segregation, which is solitary confinement. My last year of incarceration was spent in East Moline, a minimum security prison along the banks of the Mississippi River. I'm going to tell you about some experiences and some people I met along the way. But it was before I went to prison that I received invaluable advice that I live by today. After my nervous breakdown and after I was released from the hospital in 2005, I read only one book in the year and a half before I went to prison. The book was Born Again by Chuck Colson. It took me over a year to read it because my comprehension level was at an all-time low. Chuck Colson was chief counsel in the White House during the Nixon administration. He spent 7 months in a federal prison for his involvement in the Watergate scandal. When Chuck Colson got out of prison, he founded Prison Fellowship Ministries, which today ministers to thousands and thousands of inmates and their families around the world. When I finished reading Born Again, I thought, I have to meet this author, Chuck Colson. This was certainly a delusional thought on my part, since I knew I would be going to prison in a few short weeks. But through the most unlikely set of circumstances that I can only explain through the power of the Holy Spirit, I met Chuck Colson, and he told me the most important lesson he learned in prison, that he was no better than anyone else. His words of humility helped me survive in prison, and humility guides me today. Chuck Colson wrote his powerful reflection in a letter to me in prison. When I was sent to prison, my greatest fear was that I would never be able to do significant things in life again. Now I see that I would never have been able to do anything truly significant without prison. As I mentioned, I spent a year confined in a 6-foot by 9-foot cell for 22 hours a day in Galesburg. Little things that we take for granted in our lives meant everything to me in prison, like a pen. My first pen was a Bic pen. For safety reasons, the hard plastic exterior was removed by the guards. I had only the ink cartridge, soft and flexible. I was not allowed to purchase another pen at the commissary until my pen ran out of ink. I wrote letters, I wrote notes, I wrote and wrote and wrote. And I bought new pens when my old pens ran out of ink. I have never before or since prison had occasion to write with a Bic pen until it ran out of ink. But while I was in prison, I went through 54 Bic pens. I will never take a pen for granted again. Another little thing is shampoo. I had just bought a bottle of shampoo at the commissary where we were permitted to shop at least once a month. But after I used the shampoo for the first time, I forgot it in the shower. I was locked in my cell before I realized it. I felt sick. Shampoo is a luxury on the inside. Later that night, a friend whose name is Big Red, he looked like Brian Urlacher, linebacker for the Bears, except Big Red is twice Urlacher's size. Big Red slid my bottle of shampoo through the chuck hole in my door. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked and so happy. I thanked Big Red and told him I figured someone would take my shampoo and I'd never see it again. And then Big Red made one of the all-time great ironic statements. Hey, we ain't no thieves in here. But we were thieves in there. I know I was. And thankfully, my family, dear friends, and God never abandoned me. Found in chapter 25 of Matthew is this verse. I was in prison and you came to visit me. I was not permitted to have visits in Cook County Jail or Stateville, but in Galesburg I was allowed visits. During my incarceration, Kathy visited me exactly 100 times, driving or being driven 37,000 miles in the process. What devotion, something I did not earn, nor do I deserve. Kathy is the innocent spouse, and I turned her life into a disaster zone. Yet in spite of that, Kathy has forgiven me. She gives me something that very few inmates have in prison, a loving and supportive wife. Kathy is my hero. Another hero of mine is Pastor Parker. He visited me in prison and encouraged me to write letters to this congregation. The letters I received back from you mean so very much to me, and I thank you for that. One visit, however, made me anxious and nervous. It was my first visit with my mom. Her hair was longer. Her makeup looked good. Her cheeks were thin. She was wearing her favorite suit that Kathy and I had given her, and I wore a bright yellow prison jumpsuit. She looked great, and I did not. For most visits, I am seated, but for this visit, I was permitted to stand. It was more comfortable since my ankles were shackled, my hands were cuffed, and secured to a heavy chain around my waist. I was under maximum security. I'm not sure if being allowed to stand was punishment or a privilege, but there I stood at a loss for words. I was standing in a funeral home next to my mom's casket. I'd been escorted by 2 armed guards from Galesburg, and they were watching my every move. I was on a funeral furlough, which is rarely granted in Illinois Department of Corrections, but Kathy persevered and made arrangements with the warden at a cost of $1,000, which paid for the travel expenses and the double time and a half for the guards. I was granted permission for a visitation and viewing of my mom. I was not allowed to attend her funeral, which was held in this sanctuary in May of 2007. I was not allowed to be in contact with the public or any members of my family. But there I stood next to my mom's casket. The worst part of prison for me was separation from my family, which was magnified at that moment. Ashamed and alone, I prayed for meaning to my life, and I prayed for my family. I was oblivious to the guards. I knew they were in the room. I heard a sniffling. Inexplicably, I did a 180, turning around from the casket, and standing there was Kathy, and behind her were our 3 children. They were dressed in their finest, having just been here at my mom's funeral. Kathy and our kids have never, ever looked better. We embraced in a good old-fashioned group hug. My family hugged me. I couldn't hug back since my hands were chained to my waist. My family was not supposed to be there, but it worked out. The funeral director convinced the guards that his building was secure. It worked out so well that we had a feast on the card table in the visitation room next to my mom's casket. We shared leftovers from the funeral luncheon that was held downstairs in the colonial dining room. Our daughter Haley fed me sandwiches since I couldn't use my hands. We cried and laughed together as a family, the first time the 5 of us had been together, because our family members exceeded the number of visitors allowed in prison. We managed to keep our sense of humor despite the dehumanization of prison. For me, that day began with apprehension and shame, and it ended with an answer to my prayer and meaning to my life, my family. Found in James chapter 4 is this promise: grieve, mourn, and wail. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. After a year in Galesburg, I was transferred to Vandalia Prison in downstate Illinois. The living quarters in Vandalia are much different than the 6-foot by 9-foot cells in Galesburg. In Vandalia, I was housed in a barrack building filled with bunk beds and 70 inmates. Constant fights made it a dangerous place. Boo Boo, the inmate whose bunk was next to mine, had a shaved head and a contagious smile, which was camouflaged by his fat lip, and missing teeth. Souvenirs from a recent fight he'd had with an inmate twice his size. Boo Boo's swollen lip gave him an uncanny resemblance to Forrest Gump's partner in the shrimp business, Bubba. I saw Boo Boo's fight, and he held his own against the giant. I thought Boo Boo was tough, and I was right, but he also had a soft side. One day, Boo Boo asked if he could sit on my bunk. In prison, a bunk is considered an inmate's house, and it's etiquette to ask permission to sit down or be invited to sit down. Boo Boo had never sat on my bunk before. I knew something was up. He said, "Mr. Brooks, I'm getting baptized tomorrow." I was so happy for Boo Boo, and I told him I'd give him a Bible after his baptism. Boo Boo couldn't believe it. He had never had his own Bible. After the baptism, Boo Boo was all smiles and so proud. I was about to give Boo Boo his Bible when out of the blue, and I'm not sure why, I asked Boo Boo if he could read. Startled, he answered, "Yeah, I can read. Haven't you seen me read magazines?" And I reminded Boo Boo that the magazines he looked at were all pictures. Boo Boo got quiet and confessed, "No, I can't read, but will you still give me that Bible? I've never had a Bible my whole life. I just want my own Bible." I told him of course I'd give him a Bible, and I would also help him memorize the 25 most important words in the Bible. I was referring to John 3:16. I wasn't sure if I'd hurt Boo Boo's feelings about his illiteracy. I watched that night as Boo Boo treated his Bible like a treasure. He wrapped it in a towel and carefully placed it in his bed box. A bed box is a secure footlocker type box under each bunk. It contains all an inmate's possessions except for the state-issued black boots which sit next to the box. The next morning, I could see my reflection in the shine of my boots. They had never been so clean and polished. Boo Boo was beaming. He stayed up to shine my boots, his gift to me. A week later, Boo Boo had tears in his eyes as he asked if I could help him write a letter to his sister, whose 24-year-old son had just been shot and killed. I wrote down Boo Boo's heart-wrenching words that question how this senseless shooting could happen to a Christian mother and child. Boo Boo ends his letter by giving these words that he memorized. "Sister, there's a promise for Reginald that are the 25 most important words in my Bible. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." There's an epilogue to this story. On the other side of Boo Boo's bunk was an inmate named Gray John. He had gray hair, and his name was John. Gray John had been watching Boo Boo and me. He saw what Boo Boo's Bible meant to him. So Gray John wanted to see what that was all about. Gray John wanted a Bible. I had an extra Bible, so I gave it to him. Gray John read the Bible day and night. Gray John was Buddhist. I was transferred out of Vandalia about a week later, so I don't know how Gray John's story ends. But I do know the power and truth in the Bible is transforming. After Vandalia, I was transferred to East Moline, the minimum security prison on the banks of the Mississippi. One of the benefits of this prison is something called free movement. During designated times, inmates can walk to and from destinations such as a running area, softball field, weightlifting pit, library, or chapel without being escorted by the guards. However, inmates going to and from the chow hall were under the close supervision of the guards. We walked in formation in rows of 2. But during free movement, we could walk where we want, when we want, at whatever pace we want. This freedom is a joy, but it came with a pet peeve of mine. Everybody walked so slow. I found myself walking around inmates who walked slow. I suppose my habit of walking fast began early in my business career when I commuted downtown with the thousands of others, all in a hurry to get to our offices. One day, I noticed an inmate walking slower than all the other slow walkers. There was a reason for this inmate's slow walking. He is a crippled midget. He walked alone. He always walked alone until the day I decided to walk with him. Together we walked so slow that all the other slow walkers passed us by. This Latino inmate, Castro, wore thick glasses and had a shaved head that was disproportionately large for his small, contorted body. But what he lacked in physical attributes, Castro made up for with his positive outlook. He did not focus on his obvious disability. Instead, Castro is an encourager and openly talked about God's healing in his life. I walked with Castro every chance I got. I knew if I rushed, I might miss God's voice in a most unlikely place. Castro and I became good friends in prison. I spent almost a year and a half in East Moline. On the day of my release, I was being escorted by the guards to the gatehouse to pick up my personal belongings and go through some final procedures, when I heard someone call out, "Mr. Brooks, Mr. Brooks, wait." I turned around, and it was Castro, running toward me. It was the first and only time I had ever seen him run. He didn't look comfortable running. I thought he was going to trip, but he made his way to me to say goodbye. Found in Hebrews chapter 12, "Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet. The lame may not be disabled, but rather healed." I proceeded to the guardhouse, my last stop before my release. A white shirt lieutenant was waiting for me. Before releasing me, he needed to positively identify me with my mugshot and my ID number, which I will never forget, R58344. He handed me the balance in my commissary account, $32.75. It was the first time I'd held money in 2.5 years. Money used for commissary purchases is on the books and never in our possession. Actual currency or coins are considered contraband. I saw a guard find a penny, an inmate's lucky penny, during a shakedown, and that inmate was sent off to solitary confinement. I put my $32.75 in my sock since I didn't have pockets in my shorts. The lieutenant assumed I had clothes sent in from my family for my release, so he told me to go ahead and change. I just stood there wearing my prison-issued clothes, a white T-shirt, gray shorts, white socks, white gym shoes. I had not asked Kathy to send street clothes as is customary. I didn't care what I wore. I just wanted to get out. Getting annoyed, the lieutenant asked me again if I was going to change. And I answered him with literal and figurative meaning. "Lieutenant, I'm changed. I am ready to go home." With that, the lieutenant looked over his reading glasses, shook my hand, which, by the way, is never done in prison. Nobody shakes hands, especially with a guard. But the lieutenant said these words that I'd been waiting to hear for 916 days. "Mr. Brooks, you're free to go." I picked up my box, which was rather bulky. Didn't have much in it. It contained my personal items that sustained me for 2.5 years. My material possessions: books, letters, pictures, and a plastic fan. As I walked out of the guardhouse, I saw Kathy and our kids at the bottom of the rather long downhill entrance drive. I started running, but I couldn't run fast enough because I was carrying the bulky box. What a metaphor for my life. My material possessions were keeping me from my family. So I tossed the box aside and sprinted as fast as I could to Kathy. We hugged for a long, long time, at least 15 minutes. Then our family had a group hug, the best hug ever. Found in Romans chapter 8 is this promise, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Finally, let me tell you about the here and now. I'm humbled and honored to be a recipient of the Charles W. Colson Scholarship at Wheaton College, a scholarship named in honor of the man who told me he was no better than anyone else. I have completed my graduate study in prison ministry, and I'm already at work helping ex-offenders reenter society. I can speak with authority on reentry. It's tough. I want to give hope to the hopeless, and I want to humanize the dehumanization of prison. As an epilogue, I didn't know about the prison ministry program until 2 years ago when Pastor Parker told me about a mailing he received from Wheaton College. Actually, this mailing was addressed to Reverend Andy Gonzalez. As happenstance, Wheaton had not updated its mailing list, and this had been sent to Andy, himself fresh out of prison when he came here, who, as you know, founded the Cook County Jail Ministry, which today lives on under Margene Gonzalez. What you may not know is over 30 years ago, my wife Kathy tutored Andy through Emmaus Bible College, and she continued to tutor Andy through seminary as he became a prison chaplain. For many years following, Kathy visited Cook County Jail with Andy. Talk about coming full circle. In closing, I'd like to tell you one final story about the power of prayer. Long before my troubles began, every Sunday, my family sat right over there where they are now, the Brooks family pew, three pews from the back. We sat there every Sunday, and unbeknownst to anyone, Kathy persistently asked God for two unlikely things. One, that I would be spiritual head of the household, and two, that we would have a simpler life. I haven't surpassed Kathy as spiritual head of the household, but I am trying to close the gap. And we definitely have a simpler life. Be careful what you pray for. God answers prayer in the most mysterious ways. Thanks be to God. Amen.